Over the last 200 years, technology has followed a pretty consistent pattern. It has destroyed certain tasks, but it rarely destroys the total demand for labor. Instead, labor typically shifts into new categories after experiencing what some call creative destruction. And if you're wondering what that term means, I'll give you an example, and you can look to the Hindu deity of Shiva. And yes, Shiva was a great Smashing Pumpkins song. Check it out if you don't know. But Shiva is known as the destroyer. Now, why would a deity with the name of destroyer be popular? Well, it's not the destroying part, but the role also includes transforming and renewing from there. And there are also corporations who have it in their basic mandates as an employee that they need to abide by the principle of creative destruction and to consistently think about and examine the status quo. Are there things that we could be doing better? Is the paradigm stuck in the mud, or is there some evolution that can make us better, faster, smarter? That's not a bad thing when you think about it. Now, while I'm not a professor, I am going to walk you through a little bit of a history lesson here to show you where technology has entered common life and caused some disruption. Now, I want you to hop in a time machine with me, and let's go back to the 1800s when none of us were here. Pretty sure none of us were here. Now, let's think about clothes. Everybody wears them, so the demand is constant, right? Well, back then, that work was performed by highly skilled craftsmen. Along came two things predominantly that changed the game: the power loom and the steam engine. Now, why is that a big deal? Because there were a lot of people whose livelihoods and identities were wrapped up in being a textile designer and manufacturer. This technology ended up functionally de-skilling the work. Now, ultimately, this created more demand and jobs, but not after there was some drama. There was actually a group called the Luddites, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, but they would break into factories and destroy the looms because they feared that they were taking their jobs. Back in the time machine we go, and let's get up to more modern days. Let's think about the advent of the computer and the introduction into the workforce. Now, in the times before the computer was introduced into a business, it was pretty easy to spot an accountant when you walked into an office. Now, typically, if you looked around and saw somebody with a furrowed brow, insert furrowed brow here, and a green shade visor and a giant, what looked like a life-size atlas on their desk with a slide rule, that was them. And what their job was, and remember, accounting is the international language of business, their job was to record every single transaction in a ledger. And these ledgers were huge. They looked like, I don't know, they were on a giant drafting table, and they could be tens of dozens of columns wide, and every single transaction had to be recorded very meticulously, right? So if you think about that, it took both a lot of time and it was probably prone to some errors. Enter VisiCalc. Now, VisiCalc was the predecessor to modern day spreadsheets and Excel, but this was one of the things, VisiCalc, SuperCalc, I think there were some others, but what they did was they took that ledger, put it on a computer on a spreadsheet, right? And instead of having to be so accurate with that slide rule, they could literally enter cells and enter information. And yes, you introduced the era of the fat finger to mess up spreadsheets, but still, the point remains, it was a lot faster and a lot more accurate. And nowadays, you have multi-billion-dollar global companies that are able to perform their monthly closes in a matter of days. Okay, that's your history lesson. Let's just go to modern life. Your check engine light comes on. Back in the day, when that happened, you would have to have a mechanic who you could trust because they would tell you what was wrong and you would buy what they were selling. Nowadays, if that happens, go to your app and your car will tell you what's wrong. And even before that, you would plug in your OBD2 tool into your car and it would give you a code that you could then research and either fix yourself or go to a mechanic to fix, but you would know exactly what the problem was. I mean, even your kitchen is not off limits. The Instant Pot. You could have a rice maker, a bread proofer, a slow cooker in one tool. Now I'm going to share with you a personal story of where I was absolutely terrified that technology was derailing my career as it was just getting started. And this is going back to, I think I was in the business 1 year at this point. And I'm in staffing and recruiting. And I started getting my groove. And by the way, having 1 year in the business at that point was like a badge of honor because that means I outlasted probably 30 other people that didn't make it that year. Yes, it's kind of like dog years in this profession. Anyway, I'm on the phone with a client and he asks me if I'm nervous. Of course, my question was, of what? And he said, well, we're not going to need you anymore. Now my heart was racing and I'm kind of terrified. And I was like, what do you mean? He says, yeah, we have this thing called the monster board. And if you ever used the monster board, go get your prostate checked. But he says to me, with this thing called the internet that we're now getting in the office, this is a website that we could tell exactly what we need, and they're going to send us candidates, so we're not going to need recruiters. Okay. So I swallowed my heartbeat and told him I'd get back to him after I looked into it, hung up the phone, went to my branch manager, and asked him what else I could do for work because this was clearly going to die. He told me to put the tiger back in the cage and just wait it out. Well, lo and behold, decades and decades later, I'm still here. I'm still in the grind. I'm still doing this. And the monster board was bought and sold I don't know how many times. And I think it might still exist in some way, but not in the way that it was. So, how's that for disruption? So, let me ask you, back in the 1800s, did people stop wearing clothes? No. Did the accounting profession disappear? No. Did people stop needing to have work done on their cars? No. Am I still recruiting? Yeah. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the effect of technology disruption in your life, it's all about leverage. So the way that I want you to start thinking, if you're not already, is what can you use technology to replace instead of fearing how it can replace you? So let's call out the King Kong in the room. We're talking about AI, right? So let me give you some stats. People typically like numbers, right? In a recent survey done by the Manpower Group in their US talent shortage survey, they reported that 69% of US organizations are finding it difficult to find skilled talent. A survey by the staffing company Snelling reports that soft skills such as adaptability, reliability, work ethic, and emotional intelligence are stronger predictors of long-term performance than technical qualifications alone. That sounds pretty human to me. Now, let's look at how AI is polluting the job market. A 2025 survey that I found stated that 28% of candidates now use AI to generate fake work samples, and 47% use AI to embellish their qualifications. Let me tell you, that number has only grown. Remember this, AI has no lived experience. It can scan everything ever written and put online in order to extrapolate a response to a question. Now, let's be clear. If you are not thinking about how AI will impact or disrupt your career or your personal revenue stream, you should be. If you are, then good. I'm going to give you 4 questions to begin to ask yourself. 1, what about what you do is or really depends on intrinsic human experience or insight? Be brutally honest with yourself here and keep asking until you peel away all layers and you get to the root answer. 2, how much of what you do is repetitive or task oriented? 3, what would you be able to do if you were freed up from those tasks? 4, how much of those tasks that you could shed are tied to executing a higher order thought? Now, what if you could just arrive at that thought of the highest order and then use technology to execute the steps to get there? Now stop. Did those just send a shiver down your spine because you don't have a response to them? This is where you dive in. Remember that scene in the movie where the guy gets unplugged and kind of sees things for what they are? The current reality is that the pace of disruption and evolution is increasing. It's not slowing down. I mean, listen, we just rapidly transitioned from prompt engineering to vibe coding. That was ridiculously fast. However, the answer all lies in the human experience. In whatever you do, in whatever your vocation, hopefully, or profession is, you have to understand what parts of that are intrinsically human and run to them. Now, I recently heard this phrase and I think it's spot on. Your mindset and your agency are your value and your leverage points. Now, secondary to this, and I haven't even heard anybody really talking about this, are your communication skills. Having the thought alone loses its value if you can't articulate it, not just communicate it. If you have that skill mastered, you get to your vibe coding end a lot faster and more accurately. Now, coincidentally, this seems to be a skill that has been vanishing from our population. And yes, I can blame texting and 140 character or less posting. You can't vibe code with emojis, know what I mean? So, what do you do when you acknowledge and recognize the current and coming disruption? First, you take a breath once you realize the change is coming and things by and large won't be the same. Then you figure out how to leverage the change. Here's a recommendation. Spend some of your working hours self-studying and observing, like an analyst, the most human parts of your role in your profession. Look for the parts where the lived human experience can't be replicated or replaced, and possibly should be enhanced. Now, I'm going to give you 4 steps because apparently I like 4 steps. I'm going to give you 4 steps to take once you're at this point. Number 1, position yourself to be in those spaces. Number 2, journal or record your progress or the impact. Number 3, begin sharing your observations with anyone who could or should appreciate them. And number 4, become your own brand ambassador and realize that anytime you share your knowledge, it expands your brand equity. Now, based on those insights, create some test cases to validate your hypothesis. This ultimately establishes you as a thought leader, and that's a good position to be in the face of change. The bottom line is this: the world is changing faster than you or I have ever seen it. There is a difference between DQ and EQ, and ultimately, you have a choice. You can go full ostrich and bury your head in the sand while evolution happens all around you and deal with the consequences later. Or you can recognize that this disruption isn't going away and get really intentional about integrating it into your professional life and therefore use it as an accelerant. This change in mindset could definitely drive your attitude and your approach. Now, feel free to share the impact that you're seeing already and tell me how this makes you feel. My name's Anthony. I hope this resonates with you. And remember, be intentional.